Falling Leaves, Forgotten Dreams. Chapter 1. Whispers of Autumn. The small town of Willowbrook was wrapped in quietness that only autumn could bring. The streets were lined with tall maple trees, their branches heavy with leaves turning shades of crimson, gold, and amber. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the soft rustle of the wind whispered secrets that only the season seemed to know. For Thomas Everett, 59 years old and recently retired, autumn was both beautiful and painful. It was the season he loved the most, and yet it always reminded him of things he had left unfinished, of dreams that had slipped away like dry leaves carried by the wind. Thomas stepped off the bus that had brought him back to Willowbrook. He hadn't walked these streets in almost 20 years. His boots touched the familiar pavement, and for a moment he stood still, letting the memories flow in. The old bookstore was still on the corner, though its sign was faded. Across the street stood the coffee shop where he had once spent hours with friends in his youth, laughing and dreaming about the future. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag and took a deep breath. The town felt smaller now, or maybe it was just that he had grown older. The return. Thomas had left Willowbrook when he was in his late 30s, chasing a career in the city. He had worked as a firefighter for most of his life, a job that demanded courage and sacrifice. It had given him pride, but it had also taken much from him. Time, health, and even pieces of himself he could never get back. Retirement arrived with both relief and emptiness. Now, standing once again in the town of his childhood, he wondered what he was searching for. Perhaps peace, perhaps forgiveness, or maybe just a sense of belonging. The bus pulled away behind him, its rumble fading, leaving him alone with the rustling leaves. He started walking slowly toward Maple Street, where the house of his youth still stood. Every step carried the weight of memory. Children ran past him, their laughter echoing. They chased each other with handfuls of leaves, tossing them into the air like confetti. For a moment, Thomas smiled. He remembered doing the same as a boy, running until he was breathless, not caring about the world beyond Willowbrook. But time had carried him far from those carefree days. The house by the edge of town. After a short walk, Thomas reached the edge of town where the old Everett house stood. It was a two-story home built of red brick and framed by a massive maple tree, whose branches stretched protectively over the roof. The sight of it made his heart tighten. The house looked tired. The shutters were faded, the porch railings chipped, but it was still standing, and it was still his. Thomas climbed the front steps slowly. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. The key, unbelievably, still fit in the lock. When the door creaked open, a wave of cool, dusty air greeted him. He stepped inside. The living room was dim, filled with furniture covered in white sheets. The wooden floor creaked under his weight, and the silence was almost overwhelming. Thomas placed his bag on the old sofa and walked to the window. Outside, the maple tree swayed gently, its leaves falling one by one, drifting to the ground like fragments of time. He whispered softly, almost without realizing, "I'm home." A town that remembers. Later that afternoon, Thomas decided to walk into town again. The coffee shop, Maggie's Corner Cafe, was still open. Its windows glowed warmly, and the scent of roasted coffee beans floated out onto the street. Inside, it looked almost the same as he remembered. Wooden tables, shelves of mugs, and the familiar hum of quiet conversation. He ordered a black coffee and sat near the window, watching the leaves swirl outside. "Thomas Everett," a voice said, hesitant but familiar. He turned, and there stood Daniel Hart, his childhood friend. Time had added lines to his face, but the same spark of kindness was in his eyes. "Daniel," Kama said, shaking his hand. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Daniel replied. "I heard you were in the city all these years. What brings you back?" Thomas hesitated. He wasn't sure. Maybe I just needed to remember who I was, before life, before everything. Daniel nodded as if he understood without needing details. "The town hasn't changed much. Still quiet, still slow. But it remembers us, even if we try to forget it." The two men talked for an hour, sharing bits of their lives, careful not to touch the deepest wounds just yet. Outside, the leaves kept falling, steady and endless, as if marking the passage of time. Whispers of the past. That evening, Thomas sat on the porch of his old house, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The night air was cold, and the sky was filled with stars. The maple tree whispered in the wind, its branches swaying like an old companion, speaking in a language only he could hear. Memories rose like smoke, his mother calling him in for dinner, his father working on the porch, the sound of laughter from long-forgotten autumn evenings. And there, hidden deeper, were the memories of lost love, of a dream he once had and never followed. The whispers of autumn carried those forgotten dreams back to him, and though they ached, they also felt strangely alive. For the first time in years, Thomas felt he was where he needed to be. Not because everything was perfect, but because the season itself seemed to invite him to face what he had left behind. The leaves kept falling, and the night grew quiet. And in that silence, Thomas knew this was only the beginning. Settling in. The first night in the Everett house was not an easy one. Thomas tried to sleep in his old bedroom, but the silence of the house felt heavier than he remembered. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoed through the walls. Every creak of the wooden floorboard sounded like footsteps. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling where faint moonlight spilled in through the curtains. The mattress was lumpy. The blankets smelled faintly of dust and cedar. And yet it was not discomfort that kept him awake. It was memory. He remembered lying in this very room as a boy, staring at the same ceiling, dreaming of the future. Back then, life had felt endless, like the road stretched far beyond the horizon. Now, lying here again at 59, Thomas felt the road behind him more than the one ahead. When dawn finally came, he rose, exhausted but strangely grateful. He made himself a cup of instant coffee in the half-functioning kitchen and stepped onto the porch. The world outside was wrapped in morning mist. The maple tree, tall and dignified, looked like a guardian watching over the house. He whispered, "I made it back." Familiar faces. That morning he decided to walk through town. Willowbrook wasn't large. A slow stroll could take you from one end to the other in less than an hour, but for Thomas, each corner held a piece of his past. At the general store, he saw Mrs. Turner, who used to babysit him when he was small. She was older now, her hair silver, her walk slower, but her eyes lit up when she recognized him. "Thomas Everett! My goodness! I never thought I'd see you back here!" she exclaimed, clutching her shopping basket. Thomas smiled, shaking her hand warmly. "It's been a long time, Mrs. Turner. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine. Old, but fine," she chuckled. Then her expression softened. "It's good to have you home. Your parents would be glad." Her words landed softly but with weight. His parents had passed away years ago, and their absence was still felt in every corner of the house. As he continued down the street, others greeted him with surprise and kindness. Some remembered him vividly, others only vaguely, but the town itself seemed to welcome him back like a son who had wandered too far for too long. The old schoolyard. Drawn by memory, Thomas wandered to the edge of town where the old school still stood. The building was worn, but intact, its bricks weathered by years of rain and snow. He walked through the playground, now empty except for a few fallen leaves scattered across the swings and slide. He touched the cold metal of the swing set, and suddenly he was 12 again, racing Daniel to see who could swing higher, their laughter echoing across the yard. A wave of melancholy passed through him. The schoolyard felt like a ghost town filled not with people, but with echoes of their younger selves. As he turned to leave, he noticed fresh chalk drawings on the pavement, hearts, stick figures, clumsy words written in childish handwriting. The place was still alive, still carrying new dreams, even as it held the old ones. Coffee with Daniel. Later that day, Thomas met Daniel again at Maggie's Corner Cafe. They chose a corner booth, away from the noise of clattering cups and steaming milk. "You look different, but the same," Daniel said with a grin. "Older, sure, but you've still got that Everett face." Thomas chuckled. "Not sure if that's a compliment." Daniel leaned in. "So tell me honestly, why now? Why come back after all this time?" Thomas hesitated. He wasn't sure himself. "I think I needed to breathe. After retiring, the city felt too empty. Too loud and empty at the same time, if that makes sense. I thought maybe coming here would help me find something I lost." Daniel studied him quietly. "You know, people here still talk about you. You were the one who made it out, went to the city, lived a bigger life. To us, you were a kind of story." Thomas looked down at his coffee. "Stories don't always end the way we imagine." The words hung between them. Outside, leaves tapped softly against the cafe window. The attic's silence. That evening, Thomas decided to explore the attic. The wooden ladder creaked under his weight as he climbed up, pushing open the hatch. A cloud of dust rose as he stepped inside. The attic smelled of age, old wood, paper, and faint traces of mothballs. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, some labeled in his mother's handwriting. Christmas, old clothes, school papers. He opened one box and found his childhood drawings, crude sketches of fire trucks, superheroes, and autumn trees. He smiled faintly, tracing a finger over the faded crayon lines. Another box held photo albums. He flipped through them slowly, each page a window into another time. Family gatherings, birthdays, moments frozen in smiles. His parents' faces looked back at him, younger and alive, reminding him of warmth he hadn't felt in years. And then, tucked beneath an old quilt, he found a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. He picked them up carefully, his hands trembling. The handwriting on the envelopes was familiar, delicate. For a moment, Thomas couldn't breathe. He knew these letters. He had buried them in memory, but they had waited for him here all this time. He set them aside for now, heart pounding, knowing he wasn't ready yet. Nightfall reflections. That evening, Thomas sat again on the porch. The stars above shimmered faintly, and the air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves. He rocked gently in the old chair his father had built, listening to the distant sounds of the town, the bark of a dog, the faint hum of a passing car, the whisper of the wind. In that stillness, he felt the weight of years pressing against him. Regret stirred, but so did gratitude. He was alive. He was here, and though the past haunted him,
it also comforted him. The leaves continued to fall, painting the ground in colors of fire and earth. Each one seemed like a reminder that time moved on, that change was inevitable, but that beauty remained even in endings. Thomas closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in years, he believed it.
Chapter 2. The House by the Maple Tree. The Morning Light. Thomas woke to the sound of soft rain tapping against the windows. Morning had arrived quietly, the kind of morning where the clouds hung low and the world seemed wrapped in a gray-blue blanket. He sat up slowly in the old bed, stretching stiff muscles. For a moment he simply listened. The rain, the creak of the old house, the distant caw of a crow outside. The Everett house had always felt alive. Even now, with its worn walls and dust-filled corners, it breathed around him like an old companion. Thomas placed his bare feet on the cold floorboards and stood, walking to the window. The maple tree outside stood tall, its trunk darkened by the rain. Drops of water slid from its fiery leaves, each one glowing against the dull sky. The sight filled Thomas with a strange mix of melancholy and comfort. He whispered, "Still here, after all these years." Exploring the house. After breakfast, just toast and coffee, Thomas began exploring the house more carefully. The living room was cluttered with memories. On the mantel still sat the clock his father had repaired dozens of times. The kitchen held cabinets that groaned when opened, their shelves lined with old glass jars and faded labels. Everywhere he turned, the house reminded him of his parents. His mother's laughter seemed to echo in the kitchen, where she once baked apple pies in the autumn. His father's steady voice lingered in the study, where books still lined the shelves, their spines worn with use. In the hallway, Thomas paused before a family photograph. He was perhaps 10 years old, standing between his parents, smiling wide with missing front teeth. His father looked strong, his arm around Thomas's shoulders. His mother's eyes sparkled with warmth. Thomas traced the frame with his finger. "They gave me so much, and I left it all behind." A knock at the door. By late morning, the rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds. Thomas was unpacking his bag when he heard a knock at the front door. Opening it, he found a woman standing on the porch holding a basket covered with a cloth. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and streaks of silver in her dark hair. "Thomas Everett?" she asked, tilting her head with a smile. "Yes," he said, surprised. "I'm Anna Whitaker. I live just down the street. I thought I'd bring you something to welcome you back." She held out the basket. Inside was a loaf of bread, warm, the smell rising invitingly. "That's very kind," Thomas said, accepting it. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Anna replied. "Your family was always part of this town. We take care of our own here." Her words carried a gentle reassurance, though Thomas wasn't sure he felt like he belonged anymore. Still, he invited her in. They sat at the kitchen table, sharing slices of bread with butter. Anna spoke easily about the town, the harvest fair coming up, the cafe's new owner, the way the town had grown and yet stayed the same. Thomas listened, grateful for the company. When she left, she patted his hand and said softly, "It's good to have you back, Thomas. Willowbrook remembers." The Maple Tree. That afternoon, Thomas went outside to stand beneath the great maple tree. Its branches stretched wide, like arms offering shelter.
He remembered climbing it as a boy, scraping his knees and laughing as his father called for him to come down before he broke his neck. He placed his hand against the trunk. The bark was rough beneath his palm, solid and strong. This tree had been here long before him and would remain long after. A sudden breeze sent a cascade of leaves tumbling around him, swirling in the golden light. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the sound of rustling leaves wash over him. For a moment, he felt like a boy again, but the weight of years soon returned. He opened his eyes, whispering, "What do I do now?" The tree stood tall, a witness to his return, and the dreams he thought forgotten stirred gently within him, waiting. Memories with Daniel. That evening, Thomas met Daniel again. They walked along Willowbrook's main street, passing the small shops and lampposts glowing softly as dusk settled. "Remember when we used to race bikes down this road?" Daniel asked with a grin. I chuckled. "And we'd nearly crash into Mrs. Turner's fence every time." "She'd chase us off with her broom," Daniel laughed. Then his tone softened. "It's strange, isn't it? To come back and find everything so familiar and yet feel like strangers in it. I keep expecting to see my parents on the porch or hear their voices in the house. But all I get is silence." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the silence has its own way of speaking. You just have to listen long enough." They stopped at the bridge that crossed Willowbrook Creek. The water moved slowly, carrying fallen leaves downstream. Thomas leaned on the railing, watching the current. "Do you ever think about what we dreamed of back then?" "All the time," he admitted. "We thought we'd change the world. Instead, the world just carried on. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." Thomas thought of the letters hidden in the attic, waiting like unopened doors. He wasn't ready to speak of them yet. Evening at the house. When Thomas returned, the maple tree glowed under the porch light. He sat outside, the night air cool against his skin. Fireflies blinked across the yard, their light soft and fleeting. The house behind him creaked as though settling into the night. In his lap rested one of the letters he had taken from the attic. His fingers brushed the envelope, tracing the familiar handwriting. But he didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back and let the quiet of Willowbrook surround him. The leaves whispered above, the stars shimmered faintly, and for the first time in many years, Thomas felt he might be exactly where he was meant to be, even if he didn't yet understand why. The maple tree stood tall, a witness to his return, and the dreams he thought forgotten stirred gently within him.
Chapter 3. Letters in the Attic. The Weight of Silence. The attic had always been a place of mystery when Thomas was a child. He remembered sneaking up there with a flashlight, exploring boxes filled with forgotten clothes, cracked photo frames, and holiday decorations. To him, it had felt like a treasure chest of secrets. Now, standing once again at the top of the ladder, the attic looked smaller than he remembered, but its silence carried more weight. Dust floated lazily in beams of sunlight that broke through the narrow window. The floorboards groaned softly under his steps as he crossed the room. The bundle of letters lay exactly where he had left them the night before, tied with a faded blue ribbon. His hands trembled slightly as he picked them up again. The paper was yellowed, fragile, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Delicate, looping script that once made his heart race. It was, Her handwriting. Eleanor. Her name returned to him like a song he hadn't heard in decades. Eleanor Hayes. They had met when Thomas was 21, just before he left for training as a firefighter. Eleanor was 2 years younger, with auburn hair that glowed in the sun and a laugh that could make him forget everything else in the world. For a time, they had been inseparable. They walked by Willowbrook Creek, carved their initials into the trunk of the maple tree, whispered promises under the autumn sky. But life, as it often did, pulled them apart. Thomas left for the city, chasing duty and ambition, while Eleanor stayed behind, her dreams rooted in the quiet soil of Willowbrook. The letters had been their connection, her words flowing across the distance, carrying warmth into the cold barracks where Thomas lived during his early years as a recruit. He remembered receiving them, holding them close, reading them late at night when the loneliness was sharpest. But at some point, he had stopped answering. Work consumed him. The city demanded his time, his strength, his very soul. And slowly, her letters had ceased. Until now, he hadn't realized he had kept them all. Opening the first letter, Thomas sat on the dusty floor, leaning against a stack of boxes. His fingers hesitated at the ribbon before finally tugging it loose. The letters fanned out like autumn leaves. He chose one at random, sliding the paper from its envelope. The ink had faded slightly, but Eleanor's voice rose vividly from the page. Dear Thomas, the days feel quieter without you here. I walk past the maple tree often, and it reminds me of us, our laughter, our promises. I hope the city is treating you kindly, though I worry it may steal pieces of you. Don't let it take your heart. Remember, there is always a place here where you belong. Thomas closed his eyes. Her words were gentle, but carried a truth he didn't want to face. The city had taken pieces of him. Too many. A flood of memories. He read another and another. Each letter brought back moments he thought were gone forever. Eleanor waiting for him outside the cafe. Eleanor reading by the creek. Eleanor's voice calling his name across the schoolyard. One letter spoke of her fears, how she wondered if he still cared, if distance was erasing what they had. Another spoke of hope, that one day he would return and they would walk together under the falling leaves again. By the time Thomas reached the last letter, his eyes stung with unshed tears. Thomas, I don't know if my words reach you anymore. Maybe life has carried you too far from me. If so, I will let you go. But know this, you were my first dream, and perhaps the best of them. If you ever return, I hope you will find happiness, even if it's not with me. He sat in silence, the letter trembling in his hands. The attic seemed to hold its breath around him. Questions without answers. That evening, Thomas couldn't eat. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letters spread before him. Eleanor's voice seemed to linger in every corner of the room. Was she still here in Willowbrook? Or had she left long ago, building a life somewhere else? Did she remember him, or had he become nothing more than a shadow of her youth? The questions pressed heavily on him, but answers were nowhere to be found. Outside, the maple tree swayed in the wind, scattering more leaves across the yard. Each one landed softly, like time slipping through his fingers. A visit to the library. The next morning, Thomas walked to the town library, a red brick building near the square. He told himself he was just visiting, but in truth he was searching for history, for names, for traces of Eleanor. Inside, the library smelled of paper and quietness. Mrs. Green, the librarian, greeted him with mild surprise. "Thomas Everett? Back in Willowbrook, I see?" Thomas smiled faintly. For a while, yes. He wandered through the shelves, but his mind wasn't on the books. He searched the old yearbooks stacked on a side table, flipping through faded photographs. There she was, Eleanor Hayes, smiling with her classmates, her eyes shining even in black and white. The sight made his chest ache. The Creek revisited. That afternoon, Thomas walked to Willowbrook Creek. The air was cool, the sky pale with drifting clouds. He followed the path along the water until he reached the spot where he and Eleanor once sat together, carving promises into the wood of an old bench. The bench was still there, though weathered and cracked. Their initials, TE plus EH, were faint but visible. Thomas traced them with his finger, remembering the warmth of her hand in his, the certainty of youth. "Where are you now, Eleanor?" he whispered to the water. The creek carried no answer, only the endless flow of time. Daniel's advice. That evening, Thomas shared a drink with Daniel at the cafe. The letters weighed heavily on his mind, and, though he hadn't planned to, he found himself speaking. "I found her letters," he said quietly. Daniel looked at him, surprised. "Eleanor?" Thomas nodded. Daniel sighed. "She loved you, you know. Everyone could see it. You leaving, it hurt her more than she ever let on." "Do you know what happened to her?" Thomas asked. Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "She stayed in town for a while, taught at the school, I think, but after a few years she left. Nobody really talks about her now. Maybe she found her own life somewhere else." Thomas stared into his glass. "I don't know if I want to find her, or if I'm afraid of what I'll discover." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the past is better left as memory, but sometimes it's the only way forward." Nightfall resolve. That night, Thomas returned to the attic. The letters lay in a neat stack, waiting. He gathered them carefully, placing them in a box. He stood beneath the attic window, looking out at the maple tree bathed in moonlight. The branches swayed gently, whispering in the night air. Thomas spoke aloud, his voice steady. "I don't know where you are, Eleanor, but if I can find you, if I can understand what we lost, maybe I'll find myself again." The words echoed softly in the attic. For the first time, Thomas felt a sense of direction, not certainty, but purpose. The forgotten dreams were no longer silent. They were calling him.
Chapter 4. Forgotten Dreams. The restless night. Thomas tossed in bed, unable to sleep. The attic's discovery weighed on him, stirring something long dormant. His dreams came in fragments. A young woman with auburn hair laughing by the creek, her hand brushing his. The sound of autumn leaves underfoot. A letter slipping from his grasp and vanishing into the dark. He woke at dawn, his chest heavy. The letters were not just memories. They were questions, and perhaps invitations. Forgotten dreams had stirred, and they would not let him rest. A walk through Willowbrook. That morning, Thomas walked through Willowbrook's main street, his pace unhurried, but his thoughts urgent. The bakery smelled of cinnamon rolls.
The barber shop echoed with casual chatter, and children's laughter carried from the schoolyard. Life had gone on without him, but the rhythm was comfortingly unchanged. At the cafe, Mrs. Harlow, the owner, greeted him warmly. "Haven't seen you this often since you were a teenager, Thomas. The town's glad to have you back." He smiled politely, but his heart wasn't in the small talk. His eyes kept drifting to faces, searching for a glimpse of Eleanor, though deep down, he knew she would not be there. Conversations with the past. Later that day, Thomas visited the old churchyard, where autumn leaves gathered thick against the stone walls. He found Reverend Carter tending the grounds. "Well, if it isn't Thomas Everett! Back to find peace, I hope." "I'm trying," Thomas replied. Reverend Carter studied him. "You carry questions, I can see that. Sometimes the answers aren't where we expect them. Sometimes they come from listening, to others and to ourselves." Thomas hesitated before asking him, "Do you remember Eleanor Hayes?" The Reverend nodded slowly. "Bright young woman, gentle spirit. She taught Sunday school here for a while before she left town. There was sadness in her, though she rarely showed it. Do you know where she went?" The Reverend shook his head. "I only know she sought a place to begin again. Perhaps you are doing the same." The Forgotten Bench. That evening, Thomas returned to the bench by the creek. The initials carved in the wood seemed older, weaker, yet still alive. He sat down, closing his eyes. A memory surfaced. Eleanor sitting beside him, her voice low and sincere. "If we ever lose each other, promise me you won't forget the dreams we shared. Even if they fade, hold them close, because they'll always be part of who we are." He had promised, but he had broken that promise. The guilt pressed against him, but beneath it stirred something else. Hope. Perhaps the dreams weren't lost, only waiting. Daniel's truth. The next day, Thomas met Daniel again. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Thomas confessed, "I can't stop thinking about her, about the letters, about what we were." Daniel leaned back, studying him. "You're chasing ghosts, Tom. Maybe it's not about finding her, but finding yourself again." "But what if she's still out there?" Thomas asked. Daniel sighed. "Then you'll have to decide if you're ready to face her, and whatever truth comes with her. Forgotten dreams can be beautiful, but they can also cut deep when remembered." The dream. That night, Thomas dreamed vividly. He stood at the maple tree, the leaves blazing orange and gold. Eleanor appeared, as young as she had been decades ago. She smiled at him, eyes full of warmth. "You left," she whispered, though there was no anger in her voice. "I know," he answered. "Do you regret it?" He reached for her hand, but she faded with the wind, her voice lingering. "Then don't waste what time you have left." He woke with tears on his cheeks, the dream pressing on him like a message. A letter to the past. Unable to resist, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with pen and paper. For the first time in years, he wrote as though she might read his words. "Eleanor, I don't know where life has taken you. I don't know if you think of me or if I am only a forgotten piece of your past. But I found your letters, and they've reminded me of everything we were, and everything I let slip away. If there is still a chance to speak, to remember, to honor those dreams, we owe it to ourselves to try. Yours, Thomas." He folded the letter carefully, though he had no address to send it to. Still, writing it eased something in him. A hint of tomorrow. As autumn deepened, the town prepared for its seasonal festival, a gathering of neighbors, lanterns, and music in the square. Daniel urged him to attend. "Maybe it's time you rejoined the living," Daniel said, with a grin. Thomas wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. Eleanor's memory had awakened something that had slept too long. Forgotten dreams were stirring, not to haunt him, but to guide him. And though he didn't know where the path would lead, he felt the first
Chapter 5. The Lantern Festival. The Arrival of October's Light. By late October, Willowbrook had transformed into a painting of gold and crimson. The trees, heavy with fire-colored leaves, seemed to bow toward the ground, offering the season's last brilliance before winter's hush. The town square buzzed with preparations for the annual Lantern Festival. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed between lampposts. Stalls were being built for food and crafts, and children darted through the crowd carrying half-finished paper lanterns. Thomas stood at the edge of the square, taking it all in. He remembered this festival from his childhood. The laughter, the glow of lanterns rising like stars into the night sky. It had always felt magical. But tonight, it felt like something more. It felt like a bridge between past and present. Hesitation. "Don't linger in the shadows," Daniel's voice called from behind. Thomas turned, seeing his old friend holding 2 cups of cider. "Here," he said, handing one over. "Liquid courage." Thomas chuckled softly. "I don't know if I belong here, Daniel." "You do," Daniel insisted. "You've always belonged here. You just forgot for a while." They stood together, sipping the warm drink, watching as the townspeople gathered. Families carried lanterns painted with wishes, names, and prayers. Children giggled as their lanterns flickered in the breeze. Couples leaned into each other, whispering softly as they prepared to let go of their glowing creations. Thomas felt a weight in his chest. He had no lantern, no wish, no offering. Or perhaps he did. The lantern maker. Drawn by instinct, Thomas wandered toward a small stall where an elderly woman sat behind a table covered in lanterns of every shape and color. "You look like a man who's searching," she said, her voice warm but piercing. I hesitated. "Maybe I am." The woman slid a blank lantern across the table. "Then write what you carry. A name, a dream, a question. The lantern will know what to do." Thomas stared at the smooth surface of the lantern. His hands trembled slightly as he took the offered brush and ink. Slowly, carefully, he wrote, "Eleanor." The name looked fragile on the paper, but seeing it there made his heart steady. He thanked the woman and walked back toward the crowd, the lantern glowing faintly in his hands. Release. The square grew quiet as the mayor stepped forward, giving a short speech about community, memory, and hope. Then, at the strike of the town clock, music began. Soft violins and flutes, carrying a melody like a lullaby. One by one, lanterns began to rise. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds, glowing golden against the night sky. The townspeople gasped softly, as if they hadn't seen it before, though it happened every year. The beauty was too much for routine to dim. Thomas stood among them, clutching his lantern. He thought of Eleanor's letters, of the maple tree, of promises whispered and forgotten dreams. He thought of the years he had lost, but also of the years still ahead. Lifting the lantern high, he whispered, Wherever you are, Eleanor, may you find peace, and may I find mine." He released the lantern. It wavered for a moment, caught by the wind, then rose steadily into the night, joining the others as they drifted upward, like stars returning home. An unexpected encounter. As Thomas lowered his hands, he felt someone brush past his shoulder. He turned and froze. A woman stood nearby, watching the lanterns with a soft smile. Her hair was streaked with silver, but there was still a trace of auburn in it, catching the lantern light. Her posture, her quiet presence, it was achingly familiar. Thomas's breath caught. She turned, as if sensing his gaze. Her eyes met his. For a heartbeat, time folded back on itself, and they were 20 again by the creek. "Thomas," she said softly. His name on her lips was both question and answer. They walked slowly along the edge of the square, the music and chatter fading into the background. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," Thomas admitted, his voice rough. "I wasn't sure I wanted to," Eleanor said gently, though not unkindly. "The past, it hurt." He nodded, shame rising. "I left. I thought I was doing the right thing, chasing duty, chasing a future, but I lost more than I realized. And now," she studied him. "Now," he said, "I don't want to run anymore. I don't expect forgiveness, Eleanor. I just wanted to remember, to honor what we had." Eleanor's gaze softened. "I kept those dreams for a long time, Thomas, even when they hurt. I thought they were gone, but tonight, maybe they were only waiting." They stood in silence, watching as their lanterns drifted higher, carrying words and names into the night sky. Closing the circle. Later, as the festival wound down and the townspeople drifted home, Thomas and Eleanor walked together under the maple tree. Its branches swayed above them, scattering the last of its leaves. "Do you remember what we promised here?" Eleanor asked. "That we wouldn't forget our dreams," Thomas whispered. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not too late." They didn't speak of the years lost or of what the future would demand. For that night, it was enough to stand together under the autumn sky, the air filled with the glow of lanterns and the quiet hum of forgotten dreams returning. Epilogue. A new beginning. Weeks later, Willowbrook settled into winter. The leaves were gone, the air sharp with frost, but Thomas felt lighter than he had in years. He still carried his past, but now it was not a burden. It was a story, one that had brought him back to where he belonged. Eleanor didn't vanish again. They met often, sometimes walking by the creek, sometimes sharing coffee at the cafe. They spoke of old times, of regrets, of hopes still alive. Life had not given them everything they once dreamed of, but it had given them a second chance to remember, to forgive, to begin again. And that, Thomas thought, as he watched snow fall gently on Willowbrook, was enough. The end.
Thank you for listening to Falling Leaves, Forgotten Dreams. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more English stories. Tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment from today's story?